When it comes to coral snakes, I kind of remember a little poem, and I wonder if you could enlighten me on this, see if it's true or not. Black touches yellow, lucky fellow. Black touches red, fellow dead. To indicate...
Yeah, you can make it rhyme any way you want to make it rhyme. And that rhyme both ways would probably get you killed. So typically, you don't want red and yellow to touch. But like I said, most people who get bit by coral snakes are people who are holding coral snakes trying to figure out what that rhyme is.
Welcome to Season 2 of the Knife Wife podcast. I'm Suze, here with my husband,
Bob Terzawola.
We're professional creatives and entrepreneurs who live, love, and work together. We share our stories to find ourselves in others. P.S. This podcast has little to do with knives. Hey everybody, it's the Knife Wife. Suze here with my partner in crime,
Bob. Fun
Bobby, as I call him in my act. He is lucky to have gotten his participation trophy wife.
That's her.
That's me. And I'm still having that light life crisis at 69. Got a tattoo. My only one. I'm not getting any more. And doing stand-up comedy and running the knife biz. And Bob's still making knives, but he's my biggest cheerleader and I couldn't do this podcast without him. He asks much better questions than I can ever think of. He's the smart one. Anyway, today we have someone I also met in Atlanta who was not on stage, but he could be on stage. I think he's getting into comedy too. And his name is Jason Clark, and he's had a show on Animal Planet, Discovery Channel. He's got a YouTube channel called Snakes Are Us TV. He is a reptile wrangler, and I told him my little story about the alligators when I met him, and he had a theory of that. Maybe we'll talk about that. Anyway, Jason, say hello.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
Hi, Jason.
Hi, Jason.
Welcome.
Hello.
And the name of your business is called Southeast Reptile Rescue, is that right?
It's Southeastern Reptile Rescue.
Okay. And you can look up his webpage, fabulous pictures, and he's done so many things. But I have to ask you,
quite a biography.
Yeah, he does. I feel honored to have such a, I worked in the movies, and we had all kinds of animal wranglers, so he would be that one. And I sent him a clip with Reese Witherspoon talking about Leanne Morgan's movie. It's not her movie, but the movie she's in. And the guy, Will Ferrell, wrestles an alligator in it, and they wanted him to use a real alligator. And they said, this alligator, I don't know, her name is Matilda or something. She's very tame, and you can pull her tail, and you can knock her on the head, and you can. And Will Ferrell said, "No, I am not. I'm not wrestling in a bed with a real alligator." And so I guess they made him a prop and did a little CGI. But I sent it to Jason because I thought this sounds like something you would say. And
exactly.
When I met you, you told me, "Tell me your animals that you have that right now." It blew my mind.
Well, we got a couple dogs.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
It's mainly snakes. We've got a few alligators, but mainly just snakes and alligators.
And how many snakes would you say you had?
Well, the number goes up and down, somewhere around 200. Sometimes it's down as low as 75, but usually doesn't go above 200.
And you have to feed them all, right?
You want to keep them alive. That's part of
it. Yeah. You're so funny. An alligator. Tell me about your alligator, because I saw a clip, and you can tell me what the clip's from, of your alligator coming out of a house.
Yeah. So I've got a few alligators, maybe a couple dozen. Most of them are hatchlings that we just recently got in, but I've got 4 other alligators that we keep and use for education, and a couple of them are small, like a 2-foot alligator, a 3-foot alligator, and then outside we have an enclosure out there that we have 2 other alligators in. Male and female. The female is about 5 feet. The male, somewhere around 9 foot. It's been a few years since I've measured it, so I'm kind of estimating 9 foot, maybe just a little over 9 foot, maybe just a little under, but somewhere in there. These are all rescues that,
I'm getting a picture in my mind. When they arrest you and they put you up against the thing that has how tall you are, and it says 5 foot, 6 foot. I should just see the alligator standing up there to 9 feet. And, oh my, how do you measure an alligator? Very carefully, right?
Yeah. You got to be really fast.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I do sometimes is when he's laying out in the sun, especially if he's stretched out straight, I'll kind of say, okay, see that little blade of grass right there? Remember that blade of grass and this one? Then once he moves, I'll measure between those points sometimes. I mean, other times we've gotten on the gator, we'll get on them and check them out and, physically put a tape measure on them. We've done that too.
Oh my God. Okay. So when you get on an alligator, I mean, I told you my childhood story of the escapee from my classroom, but how do you get on an alligator? I mean, do you have to feed him first? What do you do?
You can, you can just get on him, but there's a right way and a wrong way.
Yeah, getting off is the hard part.
Tell us the right way and tell us the wrong way. No one's ever had. I've never had this discussion before.
Yeah, I mean, and there's videos online you can go find of people jumping on alligators, and the ones that go bad, they're pretty easy to pick apart and tell you why. But like, for instance, if I get a nuisance alligator call and there's a gator shown up in a parking lot or something somewhere, what I do is I make sure that where we're catching him, that, I'm not going to be in a dangerous area, like, tripping and falling over this or that. So if I need to move the gator over, 10 feet to the side, I'll do that. And it's pretty easy. Even with a big, 10-foot alligator, you just kind of pick him up, get your hands on the tip of his tail and just drag him backwards to the place where you want him. And then what I do, because I work with snakes, I always have a snake hook with me. And so I'll use that. And basically I'll just take the rubber handle of my hook and just barely tap the gator behind his leg on the base of his tail on one side. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, he jumps around with every bit of might he's got and tries to kill you. And then you tap him again on the other side, and he jumps around that side and tries to kill you. Well, if you do that 10, 15, 20 times, him trying to kill you gets a lot slower because he's worn out.
Like a boxer.
And I'd much rather jump on a worn out gator than I would a fresh, ready to eat you gator. Okay. So, I just take a towel. I drape a towel over his head just to kind of, temporarily blind him so he can't see where I'm at.
Okay.
And then I stand over him and I sit on him. But this is the critical part. What you'll see in some videos is you'll see somebody maybe put their hands on the gator's neck and then sit down, or sit down and then put their hands on the gator's head to hold it. What you want to do, when your hands touch the gator, your body should be touching the gator. Every part of your body should touch this gator at the same time. So you're using your body weight and everything, especially if it's a big gator, because as soon as you touch his neck with your hands and you're not sitting on him to hold him down, he's going to take control of the situation pretty quick. Yeah. So it takes a little bit of nerve and trial and error, but fortunately, learning through trial and error, I haven't lost any body parts yet.
I know you were completely intact when I met you. You looked good.
That error part could be pretty serious there.
It can be. Quite a learning curve. Yeah.
Someone told me the most dangerous part was their tail. Is that true?
Well, that's a person who's never been bit. That's what they say. Yeah.
Well, tell me, Jason, it's something that I'm a little bit confused about. Why would anybody want to do this? Why would you want to jump on the back of an alligator?
Why would you not want to do this? That confused me. You've never seen a gator on TV and somebody jump on and say, oh, man, I want to do that.
No.
I mean, that's the first thing I thought of when I saw it.
And how tall are you? You're a pretty big guy.
I'm 6'5".
There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Because if I jumped on it, they would the gator would laugh.
Yeah, I had a volunteer. We had a lot of volunteers back before the pandemic started. And so I had this volunteer, and I don't know, I mean, she was a tiny girl and she wanted to handle gators and stuff. And so they started with a 6-foot alligator. And so I walked her through what to do. And then she, when she went to jump on the gator, she did it perfectly. And the gator stood up and walked off with her on him.
On its hind legs?
And she's like, what do I do? I'm like, I don't eat a sandwich. Something, you need to gain some weight. You got to have some oomph in your jump when you jump on the gator.
Yeah, they got to know you're there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, then that gives me an excuse to have another sandwich. No, I'm not going to do this. I love the term nuisance alligator. That is, you should have T-shirts that say that. Don't be a nuisance alligator.
And yeah. I noticed that you're an alligator agent trapper, and that was in capital letters. And
yeah, there are certain licenses here in Georgia and how they classify things. So, there's different, like if you catch alligators under 4 foot long, that's what a nuisance alligator trapper does. And then you have, your gators over 4 foot. That's what an alligator agent trapper does. But so I actually do both of those. So they just classify gators differently based on the size and their behaviors and things. So in order for it to be a nuisance gator, it has to meet certain specifications for us to classify it as a nuisance alligator.
Mm-hmm.
Wait a second. So if I get an alligator in my backyard,
that's a nuisance.
That's a
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
yeah. So I go out there and I call up this number and I said, I got an alligator in my backyard. I need somebody to get rid of it. And they'll say, how big is it? And I say, well, I've got to go out and measure it.
Exactly. We have to know
what do I get?
how big it is. Now, if you have a river running through your backyard and you're living on the river and there's a gator shows up in the river, well, I mean, that's where they're supposed to live, is in the river. You shouldn't have bought a house on the river, okay? That's what we're going to tell you. But if if you have a 1 acre fish pond in your backyard and a gator shows up in that, I understand you don't want that. That would classify as a nuisance gator. But we just kind of eyeball it, because you can look at a gator's head and you can look at his eyes, the tip of his nose, and typically, if you get an estimate of what, just say you think there's 6 inches between the gator's nose and his eyes, then that gator's about 6 foot long. So that's a pretty good way to estimate about how big this gator is.
So I've got to go up there with a 6-inch ruler and measure this so I know which number to call?
Well, I think
you call the same number, but so the way it works in Georgia, if the gator is under 4 foot, then the trapper can't. All he can do is relocate the gator, and then he would then charge the property owner a fee for doing that. Okay.
If they charge
if
by
the
the
gator's
foot?
over 4 foot, then it's a different classification, and that trapper is legally allowed to process the gator, meaning they can kill it and get the meat and the hide from it. And then that's how they would get any money. And so they can't charge the property owner. So if you have a 10-foot alligator, it's free to have it removed. The only way I would get paid for that is if I kill the gator, sell its meat, and sell its hide. Now, I'm not opposed to that. I'm a meat eater, but I also like alligators. I just like catching them. So we don't kill them. We just catch them and relocate them. And if they're under 4 foot, I get paid for it. If they're over 4 foot, I don't get paid for it. So we put it on YouTube and film it, then YouTube pays me. So
There we go. All right. That is probably one of the most exciting jobs. I know that, first responders are exciting jobs, but really going out for a nuisance or
I used to do that too. So
yes, I know you've done many things. It's just mind blowing to me. It's just fascinating. My producer, when I came in today, I was telling him we were going to have you on, and he said, is he coming into the studio? Are we going to do this video? I said,
bring an alligator with him?
He's not bringing an alligator from Georgia. How did this come about? I mean, did you always love reptiles? How did, I can't think of a major you would take in college or something that, alligator, trapper, keeper, whatever.
Yeah. I just always loved, animals in general. And I had a special affinity, I guess, for snakes and alligators and turtles and tortoises and lizards and all that. And just enjoyed looking at them. When I was a kid, I was kind of scared of them when I was a little kid because I didn't know much about. I was taught to be scared of them, And so, as I was able to learn to read and read books and watch things on TV about them, and I was just fascinated. And when I caught my first snake and was able to have my first snake as a pet, and started interacting with snakes in the wild that I would find out, everything I've been taught about these things, that they don't act the way I told they were going to act. It's not trying to attack me. So everything I had been taught about snakes seemed all of a sudden not to really be true. So that kind of piqued my fascination even more to learn more about them. What is the truth about these things?
And so you educate people now, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I do. On average, a couple hundred educational talks a year. Sometimes as many as 300, but at least about 200 a year, somewhere in there. Most of those are here in Georgia, but we go all over the country and wherever they'll have me come and
speak. What are local snakes in Georgia?
We have a pretty big diversity here. Over 40 different species of snakes in Georgia. It's a pretty diverse group of snakes here. Out of those 40 plus snakes, only 6 of them are venomous. So we've got 3 species of rattlesnakes. We've got the copperhead, the cottonmouth, and then the coral snake.
Yeah, and the coral snake. What was my grandson used to love snakes when he was little, and I used to take him to these nature centers where you could pet the snakes, and he'd said something, the difference between a coral snake and a corn snake or something is how the colors, the pattern
Yeah,
of
the
the
only
colors.
people who get bit by coral snakes are people holding them, trying to figure out that color scheme. Yeah, the rhyme that goes with it. So you're going to be walking along and get bit by a coral snake.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, as I think I told you before, I was a kid. In Wisconsin, the garter snake, especially the baby ones, used to fall into the window wells of our cottage, and my brother used to fish them out, and he used to put them in my bed and tuck covers in really tight so they were in there. And then I'd get in bed at night, and they would bite me. Of course,
well, I don't
they
think
were
you ought to
mad.
be mad at your brother about that. I mean, that's an opportunity that comes up that's just too tempting and too hard just to pass it up. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? So
Yeah.
he probably had no control over that.
Yeah, he didn't, and he was 11 years older than I was. He definitely knew better, but I did forgive him for it, and but it was a conditioning.
When it comes to coral snakes, I kind of remember a little poem, and I wonder if you could enlighten me on this, see if it's true or not. I think it said something like, "Black touches yellow, lucky fellow. Black touches red, fellow dead." To indicate,
Yeah, you can make it rhyme any way you want to make it rhyme. And that rhyme both ways would probably get you killed. So
Both ways to
typically,
get you
you
killed.
don't want
Okay.
red and yellow to touch. When red and yellow touch, it's usually a coral snake. However, when you go south of the border, things can change. And then you also you can have anomalies in nature to where you have a weird looking coral snake and the rhyme doesn't work. So that's why we don't teach the rhyme. So unless you specifically know exactly what snake this is, don't touch it. But like I said, most people who get bit by coral snakes are people who are holding coral snakes trying to figure out what that rhyme is.
I learned that in Panama, so I understand what you mean about south of the border.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, things are definitely different down there as far as the ones we have here.
You know, we lived in New Mexico and for many years, and in September and October, the snakes are out on the roads sunning themselves because it's getting cool at night, and so they're out on the roads. And one time I was driving back to the movie studio, and I took a side road because there's about 2 roads and highways in New Mexico, and if those are crowded, there's no other. You're not going to get off and go somewhere. But there was a service road along the side. And it was the sun was setting, and I saw this, there was a couple cars in front of me and a truck, and a guy stopped his truck, and he went running in the middle of the road, and he picked up a rattlesnake, just grabbed it, like doesn't everyone do this? He grabs this rattlesnake by the back of its head, and its tail is, going around and wrapping around the guy's arm, and he gets back in his truck and drives off holding this rattlesnake. I thought that was the craziest thing. I mean, I understand putting it in something or whatever, but to be holding it and just,
Yeah.
well, this guy wasn't going to miss the opportunity. This was a belt or this was a buckle or this was something. I could just tell.
Yeah.
And the car in front of me, when the guy drove off, didn't even move. And I thought, oh, they need help. I pulled around next to him. I said, are you okay? She said, did I just see what I saw? And I said, yes, we just saw that. But that's New Mexico. It's the Wild West.
Yeah.
Lots of that goes on. And we had lots of snakes, mostly bull snakes, those are bull snakes that we had when we had chickens and ducks. And they would eat an egg, and it was fun to see the big duck egg, processing down there.
That's cool.
Whatever you call it. So tell us a little bit about, you sent me a video of one of your alligators that was used in a show.
Yeah. So we've gotten requests to do a lot of different film things with, snakes and alligators too. That specific thing you're talking about was a TV series entitled Atlanta. That scene, rather, was basically about a drug dealer in Atlanta who used an alligator to guard his drug stash. And so law enforcement shows up, and he opens the door to release his gator. And so when they wanted me to bring a gator, they never really specified what size gator to bring. So I was like, well, it's just, the bigger the better. So I took Seminole, the big, 9-foot alligator.
Seminole, that's his name?
His name is Seminole. Yeah.
Cool name.
Basically, they just wanted the gator in the house. and they had somebody sitting outside with a string tied to the screen door. They're going to pull the string to open the door really slow, and the gator is supposed to walk out of the door, down the sidewalk. And he did it perfectly. The problem was when he came out, the cameraman's on one of those little trolleys, those little tracks, and
Yeah, the dolly.
and the gator growls, and it scared the cameraman. He falls back off of his seat. Camera lands on him. They messed the whole shot up, and so we had to reset and do it again. The gator did it perfectly the second time, and they did get the shot. So we only had to do it twice, believe it or not.
Wow. Yeah, I learned in the movies that actors couldn't find their mark, but I worked with the horse that was in Secretariat, and he could find his mark, which is this 1 by 1 foot piece of plywood in a field the size of a football field, and he could go to the end goal. He knew exactly where it was, but have that actor find the mark? No. Have the camera find the mark? No. So good for Seminole. That's a great story.
So Jason,
Yeah.
how do you train an alligator to not be naturally aggressive?
I don't know. I'd like to learn that, though. No, that's part of the problem with keeping alligators is because, when you're feeding an alligator, it kind of sees you and starts to associate you with food. And then when this person has this pet alligator and they release it and the gator sees people, he thinks food. So that's why it's illegal to release alligators, and it's also illegal to feed alligators in the wild. Because, most of these alligator attacks that you hear, like in Florida, usually those are alligators that probably at one point have been fed by people, and then they look at people as food. When we were filming that scene for that TV show, it was so funny because they had these little fence panels like you'd put into a big circle to make a little dog kennel thing in your kitchen or something,
Oh, yeah. With
that
a
a
9-foot
toddler
alligator.
can knock over. And they had like 10 of these set up across the front yard, and the film crew was behind it. I said, "What is this for?" They said, "Oh, it's to keep the alligator back in case he goes crazy." I'm like, "Well, he's not going to go crazy, and if he does, this wouldn't do anything."
Right.
And then they made an announcement that nobody can have any type of food on set. I said, "Why can't you have food on set?" You worried like about salmonella or something with reptiles? And they, "No, we don't want the gator to see somebody over here with a hamburger and rush them." I said, he don't care about your hamburger. You can eat on set. It's perfectly fine. So people just have this completely different mindset when it comes to reptiles. It's just so funny to me.
No, and I can just see the alligator coming up to craft service. What you got today?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so you had a show on Animal Planet, is that right?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, they called and wanted to. It started out they just wanted to do just a 1 hour special, just to kind of show kind of what we did, and then it turned into a 6-part series that we did, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work.
Yes.
But I learned a lot from it. Just all that I learned from it was invaluable, but I really enjoyed doing that.
And the Discovery Channel?
I've worked with Discovery Channel many times. Discovery
Okay.
Channel, National Geographic. We've done a lot of stuff with them over the years with several different TV shows with snakes and alligators and spiders and everything else you can imagine.
Yeah.
Because if you do snakes, they assume you also do spiders. So I'm like, yeah, we can do that.
I lived with 2 tarantulas. My son had a bird-eating tarantula and another pink-toe tarantula. And I have to tell you, everything I'd learned about tarantulas prior to that was not true. And he'd go to camp, and so I had to feed him their crickets. But the most fascinating thing for me was when they would molt and they would they'd crawl out of their exoskeleton. They cut like a little hatch in the top of their back and pull their legs up and come out. And it was fascinating.
Yeah. Tarantulas are cool. We used several of those on a TV show for Netflix. It was a hidden camera show, a prank show. And we had to have a couple dozen tarantulas in one of those scenes.
And I became not afraid of them. And he used to have a little local access television show where he would have it on, one of the tarantulas on the show. And when filming once, they crawled off the table and it fell and it broke its exoskeleton. So that was the end of that spider. But I loved it.
They fall. They don't do very well falling, for
No,
sure.
no. And he was, 11. He didn't know any better. He didn't think about that. he didn't have those, gates that they put up to keep the crew from the alligator. He needed those. Anyway, so what's your favorite of all your animals you work with? Do you have a favorite?
I mean, I've got some individual animals that I've just had for a long time that I like, but as far as it, I guess individual species that I like the native venomous snakes of the southeast. Those are my favorite, specifically the cottonmouth, the water moccasin, mainly because I teach about these snakes, and that's the one snake that probably has the most myths and just false information attached to it than probably any other snake in America. So I really like water moccasins, also known as the cottonmouth. That's probably my favorite species of snake.
Have you ever been bitten by one of the venomous snakes?
Never have. No, I caught my first snake when I was 7 years old, and I started answering 911 calls to remove snakes for them when I was in 7th grade.
Wow.
And since that time, I've never been bitten by a venomous snake. Harmless ones, I don't even count that because I just pick those up and it doesn't really bother me. But never bitten by a venomous snake.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know what I was listening to. There's some guy that had been bitten like 4 or 5 times, no, 7 times by a venomous snake, and he was still alive.
He's not doing something right. He needs to tweak his handling
Well,
procedures.
He didn't seem like a professional like you were. This was just, I'll get that snake for you. It wasn't, I don't think he had any.
Oh, no, I've had some close calls, but they've all been cutting corners, getting in a hurry, not doing it the way I know I'm supposed to do it. And so if you just slow down and breathe and okay, get here in the moment, don't be in a hurry, take your time and do it, then you don't have those issues. And when you get in a hurry and you're distracted, that's when you can have mistakes with anything you do. And but you don't want to have mistakes doing this because you may only get one chance to make that mistake.
Yeah. So there's a high threshold of fatality.
For sure.
Do you keep any anti-venom in the house or in your shop or wherever you are?
No, I don't. All for all the native snakes that we have, the hospitals have that in stock for the most part. And if they don't have it, we can usually get it from a neighboring hospital pretty quickly.
So I'm going to ask you a question that's going to seem off the wall, but our engineer had a great question. He says, "What does your insurance look like? I mean, do you have homeowners insurance, or do you have to? How is your liability? I mean,
yeah, we have to have liability insurance, and then we have additional homeowners insurance, but we've never had an issue with it.
No gator insurance?
No."
How do you keep the snakes? You've got 200 snakes or thereabouts. Are they in separate pens or what kind of?
Yeah, so we have I don't keep them in my house. We have a reptile building, and so we keep them in that building, and they all have enclosures in there that they individually live in.
They're not separated, are they? Or are they?
Yeah, they're all separated individually. Yeah.
So you have like 200 habitats.
And
what do you feed them?
It depends on the animal. So we raise our own mice and rats. So we have a little storage shed. That's our rat building. So we raise our mouse house, I guess.
A mouse house in a rat building. Okay.
Yeah. So we raise mice and rats in there. And then those go to feed, the snake. So, if it's a baby snake, we might have to have a day-old mouse, a tiny, tiny mouse to feed if it's a baby. And then other snakes, may eat extra large rats, which is a pretty big rat that could weigh 2 or 3 pounds. And occasionally we may have a snake that may even eat something as big as a rabbit.
And how often do you feed the snakes?
It all depends on the species and the size. Usually your baby snakes are growing quicker. They're growing faster, so they're going to eat more often. Usually at least once a week.
Yeah.
As they become adults, it changes a little bit. It can be every week to every week and a half to every, 2 or 3 weeks, depending on how big their last meal was.
Bob, we used to bring our roosters. I had a farm for Jason, and I had lots of, after I married Bob, we had chickens, and they'd come a straight run, and, you get half roosters, and I didn't want roosters. We had a art store in town that had a whole room, remember? And what kind of snake was that?
That was a python.
A python.
It was a big python. It was probably 18 to 20 feet long.
Yeah.
It was really, really big. They had a room one wall was just glass, so people could look in and see it. And they had some tree branches there. I think it was about 20 feet. It was absolutely enormous.
So I'd call them and I say, "Is he?" I don't know if it was a he or she. I'd say, "Is he hungry? I got a rooster for him."
Mm-hmm.
And they'd say, "Oh, he just ate. Somebody brought him something else," because everybody was always feeding him. So I said, "Give him I don't know how many days." And so then I'd come back and I put it in a box, and I did not watch. I didn't want to watch it, but
Yeah.
my son was fascinated with the whole thing.
It was a Burma python.
Yeah.
That's what it was. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Burmese python.
Burmese. It was a beautiful snake.
Mhm.
It was
Yeah.
a gorgeous snake, but in that room, that was a gorgeous snake. All right. So what other questions did you want to ask this? Is there anything a story you want to tell us that maybe we haven't thought to ask? I mean, I'm sure you have stories as long as, the state of Tennessee.
We got a call not too long ago about a guy called and said, "Hey, my friend, my ex-friend asked
My
me
ex-friend.
My ex-friend?
if he could keep his pet snakes in my camper because I got my camper parked in my backyard." And he's like, I don't really do snakes, but, he was going through a hard time and needed somewhere temporarily to put them. So I let him do it. He said, "Well, it was 3 months ago. And now his phone's disconnected. I don't know where he's at. And I need my camper, but I'm not going in there."
Oh, so they
And I
weren't
was like,
they
"Yeah,
weren't
okay."
contained. They're just in there.
No, they were in, enclosures in there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, "Okay, so we'll go over there." And, thank God the guy wasn't in there dead, because that would have freaked me out. That's what scares me. I don't like dead people. I don't like any of that stuff. Okay. That
Dead
freaks me
people.
out.
They're really
Yeah.
a buzzkill.
Yeah. I don't do that. But there were a lot of dead snakes in there because they'd been just unattended, but there were 14 of them that were still alive. And, and most of those were in bad shape. But there was a couple of federally protected species. There was a lot of exotic, species of rattlesnakes. There was a Brazilian lancehead, which is extremely venomous. There was a death adder, which is within the top 10 most venomous snakes in the world, from Australia, in there. So we end up with a lot of those calls. And because I used to be a cop, a lot of times we'll get calls to assist law enforcement when they have people that have animals they're not supposed to have. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so we get a lot of those calls that come in too. But no, the one thing that freaks me out, because like you were saying, Susan, that you kind of maybe a little afraid of snakes, and you don't know if you want to talk to me, I understand that, because the thing that freaks me out are funeral homes, caskets, a hearse driving down the highway. I won't ride next to one. I won't ride behind it, because if I'm riding behind it, I'm where it just was. I don't even do that.
Yeah, you don't want to be chasing death.
Yeah, so that stuff I don't like.
Mm-hmm. All right. So what happened with these snakes? Where did they end up going? I mean, some of them are federally protected. So
on that call specifically, I had to notify the state of what we had, because those are prohibited species, even though I'm licensed to have them. And so the state, just turns over possession of them, legal possession of them to me, and then we can add them to our reptile exhibit. I've got a 32-foot trailer, and so we'll take this trailer to different events, and we'll set it up, and it's a walk-through reptile zoo. Basically, you walk through it and see the different snakes and things that are in there. It's got 20 different enclosures. It has an alligator tank. You can put baby gators in it. Then it has 19 snake enclosures. You can put different snakes in there. So a lot of these snakes will end up in the exhibit, or we can send them out to zoos or different facilities that are licensed to hold them. So it just depends on what we get in. But we get in a lot of stuff. We get in spitting cobras, gaboon vipers, calls for crocodiles. We're always getting calls for weird stuff.
Tell some of our listeners the difference between a crocodile and an alligator, how you can tell by looking at them.
Well, I mean, they're very different. Here in the United States, you've got alligators and crocodiles. Your crocodiles in the U.S. live down around Miami. There's about 10,000 of them in the wild. That's the American crocodile. And then you have the American alligator, which is completely different. It's one thing people will say, well, the crocodile's snout is more slender. The alligator's nose is more rounded, which is true. But the markings on the body are different. The pattern of the scutes, the scales on the back are arranged differently. Their diet is different. their temperament's different, their behavior's different, where they live is. I mean, they're just very, very different creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got alligators, you've got crocodiles, and you also have caimans as well. And there's a lot of different kinds depending on where you go in the world. But there's only 2 types of alligators in the entire world. Only 2. There's the American alligator, and then do you have a guess as to what country the other alligator's from?
Australia, South Africa.
No, not Australia. That's a good guess, but no.
Bob, Africa?
Bulgaria.
No.
How did you know?
No,
No, not Bulgaria.
couldn't even get. Couldn't even
China.
China. Oh.
So you got the critically endangered Chinese alligator, and then you have the American alligator. Those are only 2 types of alligators in the world.
Get. Oh,
I learned so much. This is going to be a learning podcast soon. You know, I was thinking about my brother, the one who put the snakes in my bed. He was a big golfer. I am not a golfer, but he was a big golfer, and he would go visit. He'd be in the South. He'd go to Florida, and someone would invite him to play golf. And his first question was, "Are there gators on that course?" And because he'd been chased off a course, he outran a gator once, and it came out of a pond. He didn't even know it was there, a water hole. And that made he was in Vietnam, but this made a much more of a lasting impression than his 2 tours of Vietnam.
You know, what's amazing, like you said, he didn't even know it was there. What's amazing is the shallow depth of water a gator can submerge in completely and just be, just disappear.
Mm-hmm.
I heard somebody say one time, for instance, if you have a 6-foot alligator, they can submerge in 6 inches of water. If you have a 12-foot alligator, they can submerge in 12 inches of water. I don't know if that's exactly true, but it's probably pretty close to accurate, I would imagine.
Yeah, who fact checks that anyway?
Yeah, right.
So, wow. You have taught us so much today. I have all these pictures in my mind. I'm still got the 9-foot gator standing in the being booked at the police station against the turn to the left, turn to the right.
Well, the other thing we do, which is something that is pretty common where you live, is snake aversion training.
Oh, with dogs and people. Maybe
so,
I should take that.
Yeah, but here on the East Coast, it's not as prevalent as it is out west because you have so many rattlesnakes out there. But if you mention, snake aversion training to somebody in California or the West Coast, everybody's like, oh, I know what that is. But out here, if you mention it, no one knows what it is until their dog gets bit by a snake. Then they're like, hey, what could I have done to keep my dog from getting bit next time? Then they realize there's this thing called snake aversion training. So we do that as well.
And do you come out to California to do that?
No. Okay. I live in Georgia. Most of what we do here in Georgia. Now, we will go into Alabama, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina and do it. But typically we'll stay right here because there's plenty of enough dogs to train here. And now they do travel. We have a lot of dogs that come to me from 10 to 15 different states that'll come here to Georgia to do our training course.
Cool.
Well, if you ever come out to San Diego, we'd love to see you. Come by and visit the house. Just leave Seminole at home, okay?
Yeah, right. Yeah, when I travel like that to go and do these reptile programs, the hard part is I have to drive.
Right.
I just came back last night from Pennsylvania. I was there for a 9-day event, and I had to take animals with me. And so, I had some rattlesnakes and copperheads and, pythons, and I had an alligator with me, a small alligator. But I had to drive all those up there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a little bit harder to travel long distances sometimes because you gotta drive the animals there.
Yeah. And then they got to drive their food too.
Right, for sure. Yeah. Well, but this time I was there for 9 days. We didn't feed them.
Oh.
So because we'll feed them before we leave and give them time to digest. Then we'll take them. Then when they come back, after a couple of days, they'll de-stress and kind of acclimate. Then we'll feed them again. So we're traveling that way. We don't normally feed them. And that's fine with them because they'll go 2 or 3 weeks sometimes without eating anyway, just normally.
Okay. Yeah. In where we live, there are beautiful trails, and I used to take the dog with me all the time. And my biggest problem is not snakes or wild animals; it's other people's dogs who are not chained, who are not on a leash. I mean,
for sure.
And they're not trained. And we have the dog that I walk is a golden doodle, which is basically a Muppet. And it's not a dog. She has very few little dog instincts, except for the possum that visits us. Then she becomes a dog. And so I stopped walking them all together. I just don't. I don't, because these crazy people are all over the place. And Gigi, our dog, thinks everyone loves her. And I saw a mastiff the other day who bit my car. He tried to bite my car.
Really?
Yeah, he's biting the door handle. And the guy was just looking at him like, oh, he's eating an ice cream cone or something. You know, I was like, control your dog. And I didn't have my dog with me. I was just coming home down our street, and he was walking with this mastiff. And we have a friend who had a mastiff that we babysat for, Diesel. And I mean, I don't care what kind of dog it is, but this dog was not trained. But anyway, so I'm not worried about snakes or anything in the wild here as much as I am dogs.
Yeah, well, I've got a golden doodle too, so I know exactly what you're talking about. I think they love everybody. Oh, yeah.
Oh, they're the best dogs. I mean, I've always had rescues.
We have a miniature schnauzer and a golden doodle.
We have a terrier that's, I don't know, he's an East LA rescue. He's got East LA attitude, let me tell you. And he's a racist dog. He doesn't like anyone of any color coming in the yard. And if they have a black baseball hat or a black hoodie on, it's on for him. And then
Really?
Gigi's like, well, they seem nice to me. I don't know what you're so upset about. Anyway, so, our time is almost up. You have been delightful. I could ask you a million questions. You're like, and I know you do teach people, but you are so knowledgeable, and it's so refreshing to get the real facts about these things, not what I was taught or what I thought. Tell us your social media and where we can reach you.
We're on Instagram and Facebook, Southeastern Reptile Rescue. And we also have our YouTube channel, Snakes Are Us TV. And we have the Snakes Are Us TV podcast as well. And then our website is snakesareus.com.
Okay. And on your podcast, do you interview snakes? What do you do?
Well, I was trying to film all this stuff for YouTube. When we get all these crazy calls that we get, we'll film a lot of it and put it on YouTube. But the problem is I can't film it all. And even if I could, I wouldn't have time to edit it all. So there's so many cool things that happen just week to week that I'm like, no one ever hears about any of this stuff. So that's what the podcast was kind of for, is just telling people kind of, hey, here's what's going on this week, and just telling them. And so I'm only on, I think this week we're recording episode number 23. And so far it's just been a solo podcast, but I've got some people lined up that are going to be guests on the show coming up, because what we do is we record the podcast in a video format for YouTube, and then the audio format goes up, for streaming platforms.
Right.
But anyway, we've got some guests already scheduled to be on the podcast that we're going to be interviewing. One of them, a guy who specialized in researching rattlesnakes, and he's been bit before. And then we got some other herpetologists, and just some really cool people that have kind of done this stuff for their whole life and specialized in, certain areas of it, that I think is going to be pretty interesting.
I think so. I'm going to start listening.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
It's, that love-hate thing with the snakes. I want to hear about it, and I love that you're dealing with it and I'm not. Anyway, well, right. we're gonna close for now. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being with us, Jason. Bobby, thanks for joining me again. Until the next time, if you're not laughing, you're not living.
Bye everybody. Bye, Jason.
See you later.
Thanks for listening. If you like what you're hearing, please share this with a friend and subscribe where you listen to podcasts. Support our efforts through Patreon at TheKnifeWife, and for all Terzawola goodness, go to terzawola.net. And remember, if you're not laughing, you're not living. Comments and questions can be made on Instagram at TheKnifeWife Podcast or our Facebook group, The KnifeWife Podcast. And if you're a couple who work together and would like to be on our podcast, tell us about yourself with an email at eccentricsues.com or terzawola.net.